Welcome, everybody, to Connecting the Universe. I'm author and researcher Mike Ricksecker, back at you with another interactive class out of the secret library of the Connected Universe. And here we are on a Thursday night rather than Wednesday. So I hope everybody got the message that we were tonight instead of last night. Over 2 hours worth of a power outage here. So we weren't able to broadcast last night. So I had to push it off till Thursday. And we're still going to do everything we were going to do last night, just a day later. Those that are listening to the audio podcast, yes, you'll be getting this a day later too. You'll be getting that on Friday rather than Thursday, and I do apologize for that. But those that are listening to the audio version of this, please join us every Wednesday night, which is when it usually is, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, connecteduniverseportal.com. There is the public side on YouTube, which is the Mike Ricksecker YouTube channel, but members to the Connected Universe portal get the after show and the additional content and insight and discussion and conversation and everything else that we do afterward during the after show. You get that as well, and so much more out there at the Connected Universe portal. It's a community of like minds that come together. So much material back there, not just the interactive class, but you've got those monthly Q&A videos. You've got the really where you can explore with us to some of these fantastic ancient locations like Egypt, the American Southwest, and Ireland, places around the world where you can really discover with us the different things that we're doing, monthly Q&As, and got the Mike's Morning Mug videos, all kinds of stuff out there, additional articles. So that's connecteduniverseportal.com. Please join us. And then for those that are already members, there is the app. You can grab that, get your notifications when things go live, and also new feature. I have it down there should be down there in the description. If not, I'll go back and add it later. We have the mobile texting, so you can get notifications there, not just of us going live here, but also like Connected Universe blog posts are updated and all kinds of stuff like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into all of this. I see some people have shown up. There's Tom McNicholas is in the house. Jen is with us as well. Hello there. Scarlett is with us. All right. So great to see that people have gotten the message that we were on a different night. First things first, before we get into, are these your grandfather's UFOs? Which they are. They are. We'll get to that in just a moment. That is the show for this evening, your grandfather's UFOs. It really has to do with the Harvard UFO research paper that just came out. We're going to be diving into that this evening. But this warrants some conversation here. These idiots that defaced Stonehenge. Oh my freaking God. This was absolutely ridiculous. What happened here yesterday. It was a lot fresher yesterday. They did this for the solstice. They wanted to make their point and deface Stonehenge. And this is the Just Stop Oil guys. And I'm going to say, hey, this does not make me want to stop using oil. You defacing Stonehenge makes me want to start punching you in the face. Okay. It's, and I had some idiot on Twitter hit me up today and say, well, it's washable. Well, okay. Yeah. It was a powder type of paint that, yeah, you can wash it off, but because of how old it is, they have to go out there and figure out, okay, how exactly are we going to get this off? You can't just like power wash the thing because you're talking about ancient monuments. For one, it's a World Heritage Site. This is something that you cannot replace this, okay? And that powder, even if it does wash off, it's going to get into the pores of the stone. There are, pieces of it that are not going to, you're not going to get it completely off. You just won't. There's biological growth that's on these stones that not only did your powder just suffocate, but washing the stuff off, now you're washing off that biology. So if you're all about the environment, you just screwed some environment there around Stonehenge. And oh, by the way, Mr. Obtuse commenter there on Twitter, how would you like if I came by your house and just started spraying your house with this powdered paint? I'm sure you wouldn't like that. Hose down your car with it, your TV. If maybe you're doing this thing, you'll spray it on your phone. Would you like that? I don't think so. It's still vandalism. Knock the crap off. All right, that's my soapbox for this evening. Yeah, and Scarlett saw that comment too. Yeah, Scarlett's connected me through Twitter. Yeah, it's a complete idiot. All right, so get into the this thing. The cryptoterrestrial hypothesis is what they're calling it, or as I've been saying, we're talking about your grandfather's UFOs, or that was the question that I posed out there. Are these your grandfather's UFOs? Yeah, I mean, really, this is what I find interesting. We're going to go through a number of the different things that are in this. Um, we're not talking about anything new here. There's a big deal that's been made about this because Harvard's put out a UFO research paper. Okay. And I really appreciate that academia is starting to, kind of seriously look into this a little bit more. We've had the government doing that as well. Now we have academia doing this, but we're not talking about anything that we haven't already been talking about. We've been talking about these things. We've been talking about these things for decades. And I'll say this about this paper is that they do recognize that they actually go through a lot of. It takes them a little while. And they start going through some of the historic context of people that have been talking about this for a while, like Jacques Vallée and others. They include mostly modern citations, especially when it comes to the UFO and UAP phenomena in the sky. Most of that is from the modern era, which we're basically talking like 2000 and on. And so when you first start going through the paper, it's like, guys, this happened before. It's not just a modern thing. So we will go through this a little bit here. And what I'm actually going to do, and I didn't have this completely set up. We are actually going to go through some of this a little bit, but I don't want to be too heavy-handed with it. But let's kind of talk about, okay, what in the world is cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, which it's another wonderful term that we're throwing out there. Because really what we're talking about here are beings that are not human, but are still living here on Earth, generally considered underground, this sort of thing, which to me, I'd be like, wouldn't they still be Earthlings like us? Throw that question out there. So I'm actually going to do something here that I do not usually do, and I am going to share my screen here. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, I'm not going to be too heavy-handed with this, and at least I'm going to try not to be. And we are going to go through. So it's not just Harvard University. In fact, this is not an official Harvard University document, but it has been put together by two individuals from Harvard, psychology research scientist, Tim Lomas, Associate Director for Research, Brendan Case, both from the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard. And then Michael P. Masters, who is a professor of biology or biological anthropology at Montana Technological University. So two from Harvard, one from MTU. So this is kind of what they've been I will read this paragraph. So recent years have seen increasing public attention and indeed concern regarding unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP. Hypotheses for such phenomena tend to fall into two classes: a conventional terrestrial explanation, e.g. human-made technology, or an extraterrestrial explanation, i.e. advanced civilizations from elsewhere in the cosmos. However, there's also a third minority class of hypothesis, an unconventional terrestrial explanation outside the prevailing consensus view of the universe. This is the ultraterrestrial hypothesis, which includes, as a subset, the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, namely the notion that UAP may reflect activities of intelligent beings concealed in stealth here on Earth, e.g. underground, or its near environs, e.g. the moon, and or even walking among us, e.g. passing as humans. Although this idea is likely to be regarded skeptically by most scientists, such is the nature of some UAP, that we argue this possibility should not be summarily dismissed and instead deserves genuine consideration in a spirit of epistemic humility and openness. So They go on here to define a number of different things, like what an ultra-terrestrial is. It does talk about the interdimensional hypothesis. Does not go into depth here. Apparently, Masters has already put out a paper regarding this as well. So we're going to dive into some of these ideas about this cryptoterrestrial hypothesis and what an ultra-terrestrial is. Let me go ahead and stop sharing here. Okay, so it's a whole 42-page document. And again, we're not going to go through all of it. We're going to touch on a number of different types of concepts here. So, okay, ultra-terrestrials. What is an ultra-terrestrial? Because it's not a term we usually hear. We usually think of extraterrestrial. Well, I think extra is something from terrestrial, basically means the planet, extra being outside the planet, ultra being amongst the planet. So, all right. So basically, this is a definition that I've thrown out there before. I do talk about ultra-terrestrials in several of my books. So basically, it's a superior non-human entity of natural or supernatural origin that is indigenous to planet Earth. Ultra-terrestrials are beings who come from beyond the realm of human experience altogether, whether from a parallel universe, alternate dimension, or another plane of reality intersecting with our own. So theoretically, and we've talked about this before too, there are up to 11 dimensions, and there may be other beings and entities living within these dimensions. So how would they look to us if they crossed over into our plane of existence? I think that's a direct quote from when I was on Ancient Aliens. So we're looking here, we've done a dimensional primer on this before. So all these are different dimensions. These are the ones that we have access to from our fourth dimension, which is consciousness. So 0 dimension points, we've got the line, that's the first dimension, the plane there, which is basically a flat surface, which is our second dimension, and then a three-dimensional cube. So our consciousness is in the fourth dimension, that's time, and then you have all of these other dimensions beyond that. So it really goes up to the 10th dimension. The 11th is that 0 point, which is controversial. So, so there very well could be these other beings living in these other dimensions. And so how would they, look to us if they crossed over? Would they look like these UAPs? Would they look like these UFOs? And those are some of the things that we're going to talk about this evening. So cryptoterrestrial, the idea that you have other beings living amongst us. Now, we talked a little bit about this last week when we got into the idea of other beings, other entities, whether that's whether that's what we would call an alien, but not necessarily, right? Something that's interdimensional in nature, something that is here amongst us that might be able to pull us into another dimension. We talked about some of those stories like Pilcher Mountain, and also we talked, this was the Llewellyn and Reese story where Reese got pulled into, back then they called it the fairy realm, and these other little beings and these sorts of things that were within this other realm that he got pulled into. And ultimately, even though Llewellyn was for a moment accused of murdering him, was able to go back and save him with the aid of some others, but they pulled him out of that particular realm. Well, in Passport to Magonia, Jacques Vallée, he makes a wonderful case for that. A lot of these stories that have been passed down through the ages about fairies or little people or other types of beings from the past, it doesn't necessarily have to be fairies, it can be all kinds of other things, that they are essentially the same thing in the context of those peoples from back then as what we are experiencing now with what we are calling aliens or extraterrestrials, that they may not actually be from somewhere beyond, but are living amongst us now, whether that could be in some sort of underground civilization or in some sort of other dimensional realm. John Keel also talked about this He had a 1968 article called Secret UFO Bases Across the US, and he also suggested that underground terrestrial beings are more likely the explanation than extraterrestrials. And that's another guy. I mean, both these guys, Valet and Keogh, were really big early pioneers for the ufology community. And they've both put out there, yeah, some of it could be extraterrestrial, but they believe that more likely it's something here that is earthbound, that has been living amongst us all of this time. You also have Dr. Shirley Wright, Albert Einstein's assistant in 1947, speaking in 1993, in recordings that only became public just a couple years ago, 2021, in which she claimed that Einstein had helped investigate the famous Roswell crash. And incredibly, she said that this was not only a genuine UFO, but that biological entities had survived the crash and were subjected to questioning. Most relevantly, here she suggested these were actually just humans, but an advanced form of humans. And as she summarizes that, many of their species actually reside underground on our planet. So you're seeing a common theme here. Now, why it took so long for her, Albert Einstein passed away in 1955. Okay. She spoke on this in 1993. Now, I understand there was a big stigma against UFOs and things like this for a long, long time. So she spoke on this in 1993. Now, why this took almost 30 years to be released in 2021, now that's beyond me. So some people could question just the validity of all of that, given the massive chunks of time between each of these, like almost 40 years between his death and when she spoke on it, and then almost 30 years between when she spoke on it and when the tapes were released. That's, you're talking 80 years here. It's a long, did I do that math right? 70. 70 years. So, Pandora Farms is in the house. Great to see you, Lisa. All right. So, talking about these beings living underground. Now, this is not, again, kind of the topic of this. These are not your grandfather's UFOs. We've been talking about this for decades and decades and decades, and not just decades. As far as when it comes to beings living under the ground, we've essentially been talking about this forever. I'm going to play a clip here. That is, the comment is still on. We'll turn that off. And Mr. Cumin here, I think he knows where I'm going with this. National parks, a myriad of creatures, interdimensional and otherwise. Yeah, I am about to play a clip here from Montezuma's Well out in Arizona. So this is basically between Phoenix and Sedona. It's in the Verde Valley. Highly suggest going and checking it out. Wonderful location. So you can visit that, visit Montezuma's Castle, and then a little bit further down the road is Tuzagut, which is great because they have a lot of artifacts there, and then you can kind of walk amongst the ruins. So I'm going to play this clip.
Back here at Montezuma's Well, I always find this place interesting. There's fascinating legends associated with it. Of course, you can see the cliff dwellings right into the walls, similar to Montezuma's castle. So definitely an obvious relationship between here and the castle site. Of course, the legends are that those peoples originated from here. Now, they didn't just pop out of the ground here, although in a way they did, in that when the Great Cataclysm happened, that they fled here, that this was an open hole, and there was a civilization of different peoples that lived here under the ground. So my former co-hostess, Victoria Monday, would talk about, hollowed earth, which is perfectly fine. These are the quote-unquote ant people. Somehow, some way, they resembled ants, and our colleague who passed away here not too long ago, Clifford Mahooty, Zuni Elder, had a lot of really interesting tales about the ant people that lived underground here. Basically, they helped these people survive during the cataclysm. And when things had subsided and came back and were normal, They literally came up out of the ground, and then they populated the different areas, notably downstream there at Montezuma's castle. Of course, you can cliff dwellings there. There are also dwellings here within the rock. Come back around here a little bit. You see the dwelling down there, and then actually all through here, you have the dwellings as well. Now, there's graffiti there. So a local photographer is trying to basically, do some marketing. But they had a beautiful scene of this area here where their origin stories were. Now, the water itself is actually very toxic. There's only 5 creatures that live within there that are original to here. You only find them here. They've basically evolved to survive the arsenic in the water here. And nobody can get down there. Anything that ever goes down, people, probes, whatever, always gets pushed back up. Okay, we're down here at the river. This water here is all the way back down to the castle area. And basically the water's there, which is on just the other side of this wall, that are a part of the, that feed, basically, the well, are the same waters that feed here. So when they migrated southward up and down the river, they were still tapped into the same waters as their origin story. Now, something that's also really cool here, besides the fact that this is a nice, this very cool, serene area, the walls here have silver in them. So if you look here, you can see little veins of silver throughout. Now, of course, this being a national park, you can't mine the silver, but it's another conductive metal, another conductive mineral that feeds into the whole thing. You have the water, you have the limestone, now you even have silver. That makes this a really, really very special area, especially for those native indigenous tribes that have their origin stories that date back to here. So, what the truth of the matter is with that story, we know there's some sort of grain of truth to it. We're never going to know what all the details were, but we do know that there's a cataclysm. We know that there were people that came along to help and save other people. We do know that people lived underground in different areas of the world during those times. So it does make sense for that to have happened here as well.
Yeah, so there is an example of a story that's been handed down through time. We're talking thousands of years, in which you had a civilization of different beings that were living underground, that when the cataclysm happened, they basically saved the humans of the area. And when the land was good again, then they came back out, the humans did. But those beings would have stayed underground there, and still there to this day. And what's interesting is there are other stories. So, and I know that the one of the controversial stories that has come out here recently, the Trinity UFO crash, which would have predated Roswell, which would have been in the vicinity of the Trinity testing site. So this happened, as the story goes, within weeks of the setting off of the first atomic bomb there in New Mexico, when they were doing the testing before they dropped it on Japan. Well, I guess it would have, the testing was done before dropping on Japan, but the crash, I guess, would have happened just after. In any case, that was research Paula Harris and our buddy Jacques Vallée. But the boys that saw the beings coming out of the craft, they described them as those ant-type people. So, were they simply, were they moving about in their craft around the country doing whatever they're doing? Were they simply going home, or were they, leaving their home? If they came from the Verde Valley, Arizona, that would have been to the west. That area in New Mexico would have been to the east. Maybe they're off running some errand, and they got into that area of Trinity, and maybe something residual from setting off that bomb interfered with their electronics, causing the crash, and then there they are, trying to survive. That's also material that was collected by the government. So we've had these stories for much, much longer than we're putting together our hypothesis now. No, this has been around much, much longer. So that's not even your grandfather's UFO story. That's like your ancient ancestors. We're talking, thousands of years back. So then we have to start asking, and we talked about this earlier this year. How old is antiquity? How far does this go back? And this paper does get into this a bit. It talks about like Göbekli Tepe and some of these other locations. What I found interesting was this one quote that they included here within the paper. They said, Robert Martin of Chicago's Field Museum suggests we have, quote, fossil evidence for only about 5% of all extinct primates, unquote, with his estimation of the number of extinct primate species being up to 9,000, while fewer than 500 have been identified from the fossil record, meaning that the task facing paleontologists in trying to get an accurate picture of primate evolution is like, quote, trying to reconstruct a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle using just 50 pieces, unquote. And I laugh about that because in my last book, Travels Through Time, this is like right at the very beginning. This is in the introduction. I say, I liken this research, the research of esoteric knowledge, the inner workings of the universe, and the secrets the ancients knew and have been lost to time, to taking 20 puzzles, dumping them on the floor, mixing them together, taking away 90% of the pieces, and then trying to put what remains into one complete puzzle. So very, very similar analogy. But yes, it is a very difficult challenge with so little that we've been able to grab out of the ground to try to piece it all together. A lot of these, you go to a museum and you look at dinosaurs. Oh, wow, big, beautiful. A lot of those that they've put together, they might have like maybe 5 of the bones, right? And then they've built this whole other, everything's like plaster and plastic and all that sort of thing that they've built up. They're in a lot of ways, they're just estimating, and it's a lot of guesswork to try to put together, okay, what exactly did this look like? So, same thing with the human record, which of course is much newer than the dinosaurs, but they only have so many fragments, and they keep finding other variations of hominins over the years. 25 years ago it was the quote unquote little hobbit people down there, was the island of Java. It was over there in Indonesia, and that was a big deal. And they were calling them hobbits because Lord of the Rings was big at the time, and they were small, like about 3 feet tall. And so it was like a whole different race of hominins that they had discovered. And the local, but here's what's funny, is the locals to the island were like, yeah, we knew about them. We've been talking about them. They are part of our stories that we keep passing on. That's where like academia they don't listen to the stories. They don't listen to the legend. They have to find a bone. They have to find a cave. And it's like, listen to the stories, because, the people are like, they basically were bred out. There are some, they talked about how some of the different people on the island, they say, we know who descended from them because of some like different physical traits. So listen to the stories, right? And like Denisovans, that's a newer one here. It's been maybe the last 10 years or so. And really just, again, a couple of bones, but they were able to determine that it was a different type of hominin that was here on Earth. These were much bigger in stature, and it could be that's where some of these different giant legends come from. In my book, Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, I talk about how the giants coming over the land bridge from, and the Inuit traditions there in Alaska talk about the giants coming from Siberia, which is where we get a lot of those. Not a lot, because there's only a few. It's where we get some of those Denisovan bones and that sort of thing. So it's like, okay, were they the ones that the Inuit were actually talking about in their legends and lore. So back into that stuff. All right. Oh, and there's Cosmic Chris. Great show with Jesse Peak earlier. Yeah, thank you very much. I know you had referred me to him. So yeah, it was a great conversation. Yeah, Brandon's in the house. Lost to time if time really exists. Absolutely. And there's Tom. All right. So yeah, so Gobekli Tepe, just trying to figure out how old is antiquity. We keep finding things that are older and older and older. And Gobekli Tepe is one of those locations that I love its discovery, because in the early 90s, one of the things that really kind of inspired me down this path was the redating of the Great Sphinx, Robert Schoch and Anthony West. And traditional academia was lambasting them. Okay, here's a geologist, Schoch, who's saying, hey, these are what the rocks are telling me. This is what the stone is telling me, that this is how old this structure would be. And the archaeologists like, no. Show me a pot shard. Show me another site around the world that's even remotely that old to what you're proposing. And then poop, Gobekli Tepe shows up. I love it, which kind of proved the point. So the settlement was inhabited around 9,500 to maybe about 8,000 BC. And Klaus Schmidt actually began excavating this in 1994. You started seeing a lot more material, of course, come out about this maybe about 10, 12 years ago. But he began those excavations in 1994, which ironically is just after Schoch and West's stuff that they had done there at the Sphinx. So it was really, I don't know, the universe having a hand in that. Like, oh, you're gonna doubt that, or we're gonna throw Klaus Schmidt on it. What's interesting though was that it was purposely buried, and that's really what kept it preserved all of these years. Of course, we don't know why they purposely buried it, but given around that time frame, were they doing it to preserve it with what we know was happening at that time, or what we believe to know, that younger Dryas era, and the ideas about like the comet impact theory, or there's another alternative theory about massive solar flare that would cause all these things to happen. The cataclysm at that time, flooding, everything. Were they trying to preserve it? We really don't know, and they've only excavated a very small percentage of the entire site. So this particular paper, though, this what we're calling basically the Harvard research paper, but again, 2 from Harvard, 1 from Montana, cryptoterrestrial hypothesis. Yeah. So they actually talk about, Tom, you'll appreciate this. They actually do refer to the Lake Michigan Stonehenge, which Tom's done some diving down there. So, and this is a quote straight out of the paper. It says, similarly striking was the discovery in 2007 of a Stonehenge-like structure in Lake Michigan that is thought to be at least 10,000 years old. A figure partially derived from analysis of the rock used, but also from a potential carving on one stone in the outer circle resembling a mastodon that roamed across North America during the Pleistocene epoch, which ended 11,700 years ago. So that's kind of an enhanced image of the mastodon, and then these are the. It's small, it's not a huge site, but it doesn't have to be. You look at Nabta Playa there in Egypt, and most of the stones of Nabta Playa, I should have brought up a photo of that. Most of the stones of Nabta Playa are smaller than this. So when people are like, it's not big like Stonehenge, it doesn't have to be. But this has that same alignment as Stonehenge too. So, of course, we were talking about Stonehenge earlier. So, so they talked about that, and then they also, and I like that they threw this in there. So it's giving some credence to, the report about Gunung Padang. So we talked about this earlier this year as well in the How Old is Antiquities class. And hope I don't butcher the name. They say, yet even these discoveries may have now been superseded by claims by Nara Wijaja which is the geologist that's been working on this. The Gunung Padang site in Java features human megalithic constructions dating to between 25,000 and 14,000 BC. I do throw the caveat in there, and although their analysis has been fiercely disputed by other archaeologists, and indeed pressure from scholars even led the journal to retract the article. But I want to take note here. So it was not the scientists working on Gunung Padang that retracted it. They're still saying, no, this thing is about 25,000 years old. The journal that they published to, that originally said, yes, we will publish your work, and they published it, they received so much backlash and pressure from the archaeology community that they caved. They caved and they retracted it because they had received so much pressure. We don't exactly know, what they were threatened with. We're not going to submit papers to you anymore. Who knows? It could have very well been something like that. Our community is not going to see you as a reputable journal anymore, so we're not going to publish papers with you anymore, and you will lose your following. You'll lose people who actually pay for your journal to do their research, because we're not going to submit material to you anymore. It's very well what they could have done. I don't know specifically, but that's my guess. But yeah, so they were pressured to retract that. But and they do kind of have a little bit of an error here. So other archaeologists. So yes, it was the archaeological community that put the pressure on the journal, but Narawijaja, he is not an archaeologist. He is a geologist, and that's what he's been looking at here. That's what he's been studying here, are the stones. And they have done core samples. They have drilled into that mountainside to figure out what exactly is down there. And as a geologist, kind of like what with Robert Schoch, as a geologist, this is what the stone is telling him. So, and Chris is wondering if I've met Billy. Yes, I have met Billy. Actually, only once, but I have met Billy. Just kind of a quick hello sort of thing at an event. It was this UFO mega conference 3 years ago now, 2021. Yeah. So, yep. But I'm sure we would have a wonderful conversation. All right. So one of the points here is that there is a distinct possibility that another intelligent civilization, another intelligent species, could have very well have inhabited Earth, if we're going down this road, long before Homo sapiens. It's possible that we could have no idea today. You would have to have those remains surviving. Remember, it's a very, very small percentage of remains that we are digging up, right? We keep discovering things are older and older and older. Of all the dinosaurs that lived back in the day, we just scant few, really. I mean, it seems like we have a bunch, but it's not anywhere near as many as what roamed the earth. And like we talked about before, and there are still more and more and more different types of primates and hominins that we keep discovering that had once lived here. The earth is 4.5 billion years old. Okay, when the dinosaurs went extinct, that was less than 1% of the entire lifespan of the earth ago. Okay, so there's plenty of time for things to have risen and fallen, even for other civilizations to come across the stars and land here and do different things. And you're like, well, wouldn't we have found that? Well, do you understand how deep in the ground some of this stuff has to be for us to actually discover it? So it's like when they're digging deep for buildings and highway systems and things like this, where they've got the big dozers out there, they've got the big cranes, they're doing these massive huge caissons to drill and things like this. And some of the what they're pulling up, they have to halt everything because it's, oh my gosh, we found some bones over here, we found some artifacts. That's where a lot of the stuff comes from, and it is tens and sometimes hundreds of feet down under the ground when they end up finding some of these things. So things that are even older, it's going to be even further. So another one of the interesting things that they decided to include in this paper, and I appreciated this because I think this gave me a little bump in book sales for Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, was they included the Alaska Triangle. They were talking about uncharted areas both above and underwater. For instance, quote, there's been recent speculation about an Alaskan Triangle, a sparsely populated area between Anchorage and Juneau in the south to Yukiavik on the northern coast that is a prominent, quote unquote, hotspot for UAP, as well as other oddities such as over 20,000 unexplained disappearances in the area since the 1970s, unquote. Do have to make a little correction there on their information. And see, that's another thing too. Okay, great, wonderful paper. There are inaccuracies. I already talked about one with the geologist versus archaeologist, and this one here, and might not consider it a big deal, but it's kind of important. So the article that they quoted for that statistic, and they do have a bibliography in this. In fact, a lot of their material they do cite their sources. They got from different articles that have been proliferated out there. They did quote some books like Passport to Begonia and others. Wish they would have quoted Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, but they didn't. The article that they brought up, though, was in the Daily Star. So that already gives a little bit of, and I guess I've been in the Daily Star, but but it is more tabloid-esque. No, it was the Express. I was in the Express, not the Star. In any case, that's irrelevant. The statistic here, 20,000 disappearances since the 1970s. And recently somebody I was talking to, I can't divulge too much information about it, but I may be up in Alaska here soon. Actually, I will be, but they wanted to know where this number came from. And I was like, I've been seeing that a little bit here lately. It's 20,000 since the 1970s, because what we used for the Alaska Triangle television show, what I used in Alaska Mysterious Triangle based on the information that we had from the television show was 16,000 since 1988, which also might be inaccurate. Doing a little bit deeper digging on it. So, why since 1988? Well, there's a reason why since 1988. That's when they started keeping track. That's when they started accounting for and putting together their database for those missing people. It was 1988. So there are no official numbers from the 1970s. Whoever wrote, well, you can look at the article. The gentleman that wrote that, I'm not sure where he got his numbers from. Because officially it's from 1988. From earlier, I mean, you could maybe estimate that it would be over 20,000 since 1970 if you wanted to make it seem like a longer period of time and a greater number of people. You could, do a little number crunching and make that estimate. But if you want to get into official numbers, it's since 1988. And actually, there was I was trying to answer that guy's question. I did a little further digging. And I did find some articles from, it was like around 2005, 2006. It was LA Times, it was Washington Post. There was a Seattle paper. I think it's Seattle Dispatch, I think is the paper. And it wasn't 16,000 since 1988 in those numbers. So we're talking 2005, 2006. Their number was 60, not 16, that they had used. So that is an astronomical number. Now, that is not the number of people who are still missing, okay? The number of people that are still missing is a little over 1,000, and that doesn't really count indigenous folk either. They have released a new database here for indigenous people because they don't really keep track of those too well. And there's also the interesting aspect that part of the Alaska Triangle does cut into Canada. So those numbers aren't going to be in the official Alaska record either. Like when we talk about, um, you know, airplanes that have gone missing in the Alaska Triangle. Well, that database, which is since 1962, there's 40 airplanes that are still missing since then, which is a pretty hefty number. But that's not going to count because that's just Alaska. That's not going to count for any of those that went missing in the part of Canada that's part of the triangle. And we already know, and this already predates the 1962 date anyway, when I talk about the 1950 Douglas Skymaster. That's went down in the area of Snag in Yukon Territory in Canada. So even if the database went back further than 1962, that still wouldn't count because it was in Canada, but it was still in the triangle. So there's those little things as well. The article does touch on Atlantis. We're not going to get into that. That's a whole other discussion for another time. It does get into out-of-place artifacts. Again, another one I'm not really going to get into because we could do another whole class on that. We have done whole classes on Atlantis. We could do a whole. I don't think we've done out-of-place artifacts. I think I mentioned them a time or two. But this is the London Hammer, discovered in the 1930s near London, Texas, which is why they call it the London Hammer. And somehow this thing got embedded within that stone, and part of the handle is starting to turn into coal. And the amount of time it takes for that to happen, and we're talking 400 to 500 million years. Now, it's a controversial artifact. Many of these out-of-place artifacts are controversial. So there still needs to be more testing and things like that done on it. And so, you have a skeptical community that's going to, talk about, no, it's not. Scientists are going to want more information because it just flies in the face of their timeline, of their narrative. But we have an artifact here and others, that say, well, there were civilizations that apparently were around much earlier. Now, just looking at something like that, like a hammer, it doesn't necessarily mean it's human. If we're talking about these other, potential civilizations that are living amongst us and have been for a long, long time. Again, we'll go back to the Montezuma's Well story. It could be one of their tools. It doesn't have to be human. And I think that's the thing that we keep forgetting is, just because it's here from Earth, it does not necessarily make it human. And we know Neanderthals and others use tools. So that's like when it comes to the time travel thing, you have people saying, well, UAPs, UFOs, those are just us from the future. They're time travelers. Well, could be. Again, I think there are many different things. But even if it is a time traveler from the future, it doesn't necessarily make it us. Stop being so arrogant as a human. Could be millions of years from now, humans are gone and some other life form has evolved and developed civilization, and they developed the time travel technology, or even an extraterrestrial, from outside the planet has come here and colonized millions and millions of years from now, developed a civilization, and then went back in time. And we have about another 5 billion years to play around on this planet and do things until, it's encompassed by the sun. So, yeah. All right. So a couple other things that they talk about. They do mention underground civilizations. So Derinkuyu. So we do know that humans lived under the ground, but they do have a statement here which is really counterintuitive to when they talk about Derinkuyu, because they say, as to the central question of whether any intelligent species, Homo sapiens or otherwise, has actually gone underground in the past, there is no direct or generally accepted evidence. But yet, just before they were talking about Derinkuyu, we know that happened in Derinkuyu, and there are other locations around the globe in which humans, possibly others, actually lived. So Derinkuyu is a huge example of that. I mean, it's massive, cavernous. We know people lived there. But also, I threw this one into Alaska's Mysterious Triangle. I mean, we're not talking massively underground, but still technically underground. And by the way, we are doing this today We do have massive, huge installations under the ground, like that the government and the military has developed. That, I mean, they are essentially underground communities that are, you know, living, breathing, thriving, that we have built. So our modern technology has done this as well. But so in Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, I talked about the last pole shift, because that's kind of been a, for one, we're, you know, we talk a lot about energy in that book, but this is also, you know, a concern that comes up. And, you know, the pole, the North Pole right now, magnetically, is inching its way across to the northwest from like out of Canada, kind of skirting across the top of Alaska, headed towards Siberia is where it's going. At some point, it will flip, and we have evidence of that around the world. The last time that happened was around 42,000 years ago. And when that happened, you know, and these are quotes that I threw out there. I'll just read this from Alaska Mysterious Triangle. And this pole shift lasted about 400 years, so it was a little while. During the time of the pole shift, the Earth's protective magnetic shield would have been in flux, down to as much as 6% of its current state, causing dramatic climate change. The solar wind from the sun would have pounded the Earth with radiation and likely causing the extinction of many species. The air would have been more ionized, a fantastic conductor of electricity, creating far more electrical storms and aurora sightings all over the Earth. According to evolutionary biologist Professor Alan Cooper, quote, early humans around the world would have seen amazing auroras, shimmering veils, and sheets across the sky. It must have seemed like the end of days. So is this perhaps why we're discovering so many cave drawings around the world from that time frames? Had humans taken shelter there to protect themselves from the scorching sun and wild electrical storms? Makes sense, because when you especially like France, Spain, they have a lot of these fantastic caves filled with all kinds of artwork. But it was around that 40,000, 42,000, you know, time frame that, you know, they were in those caves doing these things. Well, it would make sense that they would have gone into the caves. If they were going to be outside and get fried, you know, during the day, it makes sense that they would have stayed inside the caves during the day to protect themselves. They would have had time to do their cave drawings and then come back out at night to, you know, hunt and get their food and do what they needed to do. So, you know, people have debated on the age of Darren Kuyu and how old that is. You know, was it around for some of the different cataclysms and these sorts of things? And I would sit there and happily debate that, you know, it may be far, far older than we believe. That, you know, over the millennia, it kept getting reused and reused and reused. And people are like, well, you know, show me the, the pot shards or whatever from that era. Well, you know, you go to live in a place. You know, I moved in this house. You know, what was one of the first things that I did when I moved in this house? I cleaned and vacuumed, even though it had already been cleaned and vacuumed and everything before. You know, I just, somebody else did that, you know, before me. I want to make sure it's, you know, clean and up to my standards. So, you know, that's what you do. If anybody has, you know, left some of their junk around, toss that, right? Kind of the same thing. So, especially like when we're talking like Göbekli Tepe Sphinx, when people make those types of arguments, like the Sphinx, we want a pot shard. Well, this was something that was highly respected, so, you know, they just cleaned that out. I mean, it's a limestone case. It would be easy just to sweep that, and they do today. Just sweep that out, you know. Yeah, pretty wild. So, yeah, Lisa's asking, there's theories that we are the ETs and brought here from other places. And I actually am mostly on board with that. That, you know, we have come here, maybe ourselves, maybe we've been brought here, something to that effect, because we are so far different from many of the other species that are on this planet. And I know they say, you know, we got so much close DNA with the chimpanzee or whatever. So maybe there is a relationship there, but they've also shown that our DNA has been spliced. So something certainly happened there as well. But I mean, you think about it, you know, we're the only species that cooks their food. We're the only species that wears clothes. You know, we've been doing that for seemingly forever. So there's many things that we do that other species on this planet just simply don't at all, which makes us extremely different. So yeah. So Tom, I'm trying to figure out, okay. Saying if our planet demise is near, do you think we'd be saved again by aliens? So, I mean, we're talking 5 billion years. So it's not happening anytime soon. But we do need to put things in place to prepare for eventually leaving the planet, which is why I say that, yeah, we do need to invest money into our space programs. We need to colonize. We need to get out there and do different things. And there's a lot of people that say, well, we need to worry about us here on the planet. And that, for one, there's a lot of technology that we use today that those people that throw that argument out there love, having that technology in their pocket. But two, there's a happy medium here. Yes, we should do things to help our planet, help the people on our planet, that sort of thing, while also doing those other things and making sure that we do get out there to space, because we do eventually have to get off this planet. It's not happening in my lifetime. Probably not even happening in my children's or grandchildren's lifetime, but these generations need to take those steps to get that going, so that we can do that in the future. All right. What else did I want to mention here before we cut it off? Yeah, the paper does get into the idea of reptilian races hiding amongst us. I'm not going to dive down that rabbit hole, which, and they point out, it could stem back to cultural legends such as anthropomorphic races like the Nagas, which is a semi-divine species of half human, half serpent beings. So some of that legend and lore from thousands of years ago been incorporated into our current ideas of what aliens and ETs are and these sorts of things. Maybe was there some influence there by the television show V back in the 1980s? Maybe. Do I believe that when everybody's saying Queen Elizabeth was a reptilian, did I believe that? Well, I'm not going down that rabbit hole, but there are a lot of people that have, again, this is nothing new. These are ideas that have been around for a long, long, long time. And the paper also gets into the possible inhabitation on the moon by these various races as well. So I'm not diving down that rabbit hole tonight either, but this paper does get into these different things. But at the end of it, and again, I appreciate that a paper like this helps with fence sitters, really. The skeptical community is always going to be skeptical. You're going to convince them, very, very few of them, low percentage of people in that community that you're going to convince of these different ideas. But there are a lot of people that are on the fence about the possibility of extraterrestrials, about the ideas of aliens amongst us, crashes, all that stuff. There are a lot. I don't know. Space is huge. It makes sense that there would be other life forms out there. Of course, there are vast reaches of our planet underground, under our seas that we haven't explored. Maybe there's something else there too. We do still discover new species of life forms today. There was that vegetarian piranha that they just named Sauron from Lord of the Rings that they discovered down there in Brazil. That was just a couple weeks ago. So people do sit on the fence for this. So the fact that academia has also, in conjunction with the government, putting things like this forward is promising, and I appreciate that. I am really curious as to why the paper, why these guys didn't put like a book together. And really, the paper is almost like a recap of different things that we've been talking about. A little brief thing here, a little brief thing there. I would like to know where they're going with this. The one guy there, Masters, apparently he had, and I'll have to look for it. He had already put together a paper on the interdimensional hypothesis, which again, this is something we've been talking about for decades. So, a lot of their ideas and concepts that are within this paper And again, they cite a lot of different sources. Like if I were to bring that up, and here I will, real quickly. You scroll down and you see, tons and tons and tons of sources that they have cited. And I'm looking on a window, and I'm not. Oh, did I close? No, it's still up. So, but I'm not finding it in my selection here for some reason. So, in any case, they have a massive bibliography there, of all these different sources that they've cited. So, a lot of it really isn't even their work, which is kind of interesting. They're just kind of giving a summation of this work, that other people have done. And that was my concern when the article was first posted, was that everybody's going on and bragging. That's like the headlines that all of the uh, online journals were talking about, all the newspapers, all the news sites were saying, oh, Harvard research paper, and they're talking about well, yeah, these three guys published this paper, but let's not forget all of those that came before, that all of those that have been talking about this forever, they've written entire books on this subject. Those guys should have been getting these type of headlines. So all right, so let's go ahead and wrap up the public side for this evening. Really appreciate all of you hanging out with us this evening. You had some great questions in there. We will kick it over to the after show on the member site, connecteduniverseportal.com. Again, those that are joining us out here for the public side, encourage you to join us for the become a traveler of the Connected Universe. Join us in the Connected Universe portal. So we're going to kick into some other ideas and topics and concepts here on the after show. Those are listening to the audio podcast later on, connecteduniverseportal.com. Join us every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock p.m. So until next time, time really exists.